branding iron seared her flesh, the word Texas a permanent claim. Maeve's ragged breath hitched. 2 weeks after the war's end, wasn't she finally free? Elias, a lone soldier, saw the mark hidden beneath her torn skirt and knew with chilling certainty this war wasn't over. Am murmured quietly, weaving through moss-covered stones and last season's leaves. It should have been peaceful, but Elias Gray felt something wrong in the stillness. His horse, a tired gelding named Rufus, had stopped short near the creek bank, ears forward, breath quick. Elias dismounted slowly, hand brushing over the revolver on his belt. His boots sank slightly in the damp earth as he approached the narrow stream. And that was when he saw her, a girl young, barely more than a shadow of a woman. She lay crumpled near the water, one leg twisted beneath her, the other bare from the knee down. Her dress was torn, mud-streaked and bloody, and her hands were scratched as if she'd clawed her way there. Elias dropped to one knee. "Miss?" he called softly. No answer. He leaned in, checking for breath. Her chest rose, slow, shaky. Her skin was clammy under the dirt, and there was a gash across her thigh, long and red. He glanced toward the trees. Nothing but birdsong and wind. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, though she was still unconscious. "Just need to stop the bleeding." He pulled a cloth from his saddlebag, tore it in half. He reached carefully toward her leg, trying not to startle her, but as he touched her skirt to lift it above the wound, her body jerked violently. Her eyes snapped open wide and wild. "No!" she gasped. Her voice cracked. "Don't! Please just kill me fast!" Elias froze, hand hovering inches from her. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment he saw something not entirely of this world, something broken beyond words. She wasn't just afraid, she was resigned. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly. "Just do it," she whispered. "I don't want to feel it." He blinked. Slowly he pulled his hand back. "I ain't killing anyone today," he said. "You're bleeding. I'm going to help you, that's all." She stared at him, trembling. With great care, he moved again toward her leg. "Let me see," he said. "That wound needs cleaning." She didn't resist this time, but her jaw clenched and she turned her head away. He gently lifted the torn fabric above her knee and froze. There, burned into the soft flesh of her inner thigh, was a brand. One word, angry, red, permanent. Elias felt his stomach turn. He had seen brands like that before. Just once, near the end of the war, when his unit stumbled on a makeshift slave camp outside of Monroe. Women mostly, some alive, some not, and all of them had that same mark. His hands curled into fists before he forced them still. He looked at the girl again. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even blinking. Her face had gone blank like a curtain pulled tight. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She didn't speak. "I'm Elias. Elias Gray. You're safe now." "All right." Still nothing. He tied the cloth around her thigh carefully, mindful of her flinches. Blood soaked the fabric fast, but pressure would help. "I'm going to get you out of here," he said. The girl didn't reply. Her eyes drifted shut again, too exhausted to fight. Elias wrapped his coat around her and lifted her gently into his arms. "Whatever they did to you," he whispered as he carried her toward Rufus, "it ends now." And as he rode away from the stream, the scar beneath her skirt burned red beneath the morning sun. Silent testimony to a story that had only just begun. The cabin stood half-hidden beneath a grove of twisted oaks just beyond the riverbend, weather-worn and leaning slightly eastward. It wasn't much, but it was dry, sheltered, and for now safe. Elias carried the girl through the doorway and gently laid her on the bedroll near the hearth. The fire had gone cold while he was gone, but he moved quickly, stacking, kindling, striking flint. Within minutes, flames began to breathe life back into the room. She hadn't spoken again since the creek. Her body was still, lips pale, eyes open, but distant. A dog might flinch less than she did when he approached with warm water and cloth. "I need to clean the wound," he said softly. "It's going to sting." She nodded once, barely perceptible. He worked in silence, dabbed gently, never looked her in the eye when the skirt had to be lifted, never touched more than necessary. When it was done, he laid the blanket over her legs again and stepped back. She kept watching him, not with curiosity, only caution, a hunted animal, unsure if this new cage held food or a knife. He moved to the stove, lit a pot of beans with a pinch of salt, and ladled some into a tin bowl. He let it cool before he offered her the first spoonful. She didn't take it at first, just stared. "Eat slow," he said, voice low, not commanding. Finally, she opened her mouth. He fed her each bite like a father would to a wounded child. No words, no questions, just food, warmth, fire. That night he slept in the far corner, back against the wall, gun within reach. She didn't move once, but her eyes stayed open long into the dark. By morning she was sitting upright, leaning against the post. When he brought water to wash her hands, she flinched at first, then let him pour. The third day, Elias sat beside her with an old comb and said, "If you'll allow it, I can clean that mess of yours." She hesitated, then slowly turned her back to him. He began at the ends, gently, careful not to pull. Her hair was thick with twigs, dried blood, and days of dust. He worked quietly, patient, as the fire crackled nearby. Halfway through, she let out a long breath, and for the first time, her shoulders lowered just slightly. Later that afternoon, he pulled out a small oval mirror from his pack. It was scratched, dented, the kind of trinket a soldier might carry for memory's sake. He placed it beside her on the stool. "Maybe you want to see. You look better than you think." She stared at the mirror a long time. Then in one sudden motion, she grabbed it and hurled it against the stone hearth. It shattered. Elias didn't move. Her voice came out. "I don't want to see her." He nodded slowly. "I understand." No lecture, no apology demanded, just quiet. That night, as he was ladling more beans into their bowls, she finally spoke again. "My name is Maeve." He looked over. "Maeve," he repeated like it was sacred. "That's all I can give you right now. That's more than I expected." She managed a breath somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. They ate in silence, but something had changed. Not in the room, but in the space between them. She did not thank him. He did not ask for it. But when she handed back the bowl, her fingers touched his for just a moment, and she did not pull away. The road into Bandera was quiet that morning, lined with cedar brush and dust still damp from the night's rain. Elias rode slowly, Maeve behind him on the saddle, arms loosely wrapped around his waist. She had not said much since they left the cabin, only nodded when he asked if she was strong enough to ride. They needed medicine. Her wound, though better, still ached, and Elias knew infection could creep in if he did not find more salve and clean bandages. Bender was a town barely hanging on. Worn planks, shuttered saloons, and tired men who carried the war on their shoulders. The kind of place where strangers drew eyes and rumors stuck like flies to sweat. They dismounted near the general store. Elias helped Maeve down gently. "Stay by the horse," he said. "I won't be long." She nodded, pulling her shawl tight. The moment he stepped into the store, her hands began to tremble. She kept her head down, eyes scanning every face that passed. And then he appeared, a man half drunk, stumbling out of the saloon. Thick arms, patty beard, eyes like coal, and breath that smelled of rot. He bumped into her shoulder. "Watch it," she muttered under her breath, barely audible. He turned, squinted, looked her up and down. "Well, well," he slurred. "Ain't you a familiar little whore?" Maeve backed away, but he stepped closer. "You don't remember me?" he hissed. "Camp east of Monroe." "Oh, I remember that, Mark." He lunged forward and yanked the edge of her skirt. In the daylight, the word burned into her thigh, gleamed red. Gasps rose from the bystanders. One woman shielded her child's eyes. Someone whispered, "That's one of them." The man grinned wide. "Runaway meat?" Maeve froze. But Elias was already there. He shoved the man so hard he stumbled backward into the watering trough. Before the drunk could rise, Elias hit him once, twice, a third time until blood poured from the man's nose. No one intervened. Elias grabbed Maeve's hand. "Let's go." They rode out of Banderai without another word. Back at the cabin, the silence was suffocating. Maeve sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Elias tried to speak, but she only shook her head. That night, the rain returned, gentle at first, then hard and cold. Elias woke with a start to find the bedroll empty. He ran outside. She was at the river's edge, standing barefoot on a slick stone, dress clinging to her legs, hair soaked, eyes wide. "Maeve," he called. She did not turn. "I can't live like this," she said. "They see me and all they see is that word, that brand, not a person, just something broken." "You are not broken," Elias said, stepping carefully toward her. "You survived." She shook her head. "You deserve someone whole." "I want you," he said, voice shaking, "and I won't let you disappear." He reached out just as she stepped forward and caught her. The river surged just inches below. He pulled her into his arms, held her tight as the rain soaked them both. She clung to him, sobbing against his chest, and he did not say a word, just held her as long as she needed in the darkness, with only the storm to witness. Maeve didn't fall. She was hell. The next time Elias rode into Bandera, he came alone. Maeve had refused to return, and he hadn't argued. After what happened last time, he'd never risk her safety again. But supplies were running low, and part of him deep down wanted to see if the town had changed, or if it even could. The ride-in was quiet. Texas spring air clung warm to his coat, and the sound of Rufus' hooves echoed through empty scrub. But the closer he came to town, the heavier his breath got. He tied Rufus outside the general store, tipped his hat at the clerk, and handed over the list Maeve had written. The man nodded and disappeared to gather the goods. Elias, needing a moment to shake the dust and bile from his throat, stepped into the saloon next door. The room silenced like a church in mourning. Men stared over half-drunk cups. A poker game froze mid-end. Somewhere near the hearth, a piano player stopped mid-note. War had ended, but suspicion hadn't. Not for a man like Elias Gray. He stepped to the bar about to order coffee when he saw him. Behind the counter, leaning with the swagger of someone too sure of their place, stood a man broad-shouldered and graying at the temples. A long scar dragged from temple to jaw, like a signature left by sin. And on his chest, pinned high and gleaming, was a tin star, Jonah Beeksley. Elias froze mid-step, his hands tensed, shoulders straightened. He hadn't seen that face in over 2 years, but he'd never forget it. Beeksley's eyes found him. For a moment, recognition didn't show. Then it did, flaring like gunpowder. His mouth curled. "Well, well," he drawled. "If it ain't Elias Gray." Elias didn't move. His voice was gravel. "Didn't know rats got promoted to law." Beeksley laughed slow and mean. He poured himself a drink, calm as a cat with blood on its paws. "You look different without the gray coat," he said, "but I never forget the man who blew up my bunkhouse." Elias stepped forward. His boots echoed like war drums. "You ran a prison for women, not a camp, not a post, a goddamn slaughterhouse." Beeksley's eyes glinted. "Slaves' gray property. Let's not rewrite history." Fury flared in Elias's chest. "You think branding women makes you a man?" Beeksley leaned in, his smile widening. "You still playing hero?" he sneered. "Or did you finally find yourself a pet?" Elias said nothing. Bexley's eyes narrowed, voice turning cold. "Heard a girl's been hiding out in the woods. Scar on her thigh, fire in her eyes. That wouldn't be my runaway, would it?" The air went thin. Every man in the saloon watched now, waiting. Elias's hand rested near his holster. "She's not yours," he said, quiet as a death nail. "She was never yours. She was marked," Beeksley spat. "That makes her mine." Elias took one step closer. "You show up near that land again, and I'll bury you where you stand." Beeksley leaned forward, the badge on his chest catching light. "I'm the law here, boy. You shoot me, you hang." Elias didn't blink. "No, Bexley, you're just a coward with a star." A beat passed. Then Bexley hissed, "If you don't kill me now, one day you'll turn around and find her gone, because I always collect what's mine." Elias stared at him, fists tight. The room held its breath. Then slowly, Elias turned and walked out. Rage in his chest like wildfire. One thing was clear. The war wasn't over. Maeve was still being hunted, and the hunter now wore a badge. The wind shifted that night, cold and sharp, cutting through the trees like a warning. Elias had gone out alone to check the snares near the ridge. Maeve had asked to go with him, but he'd refused, gently. Stay warm. I won't be long, he had said with a soft smile. But something about the way the air pressed against his back felt wrong, like the forest was holding its breath. He never made it to the traps. The first blow came from behind, hard and fast, cracking against his skull. He hit the dirt, ears ringing, visions spinning. 3 men surrounded him, faces half covered in kerchiefs, but Elias knew who sent them. One of them spit tobacco near his head. "Where is she?" the tallest demanded. "Where's the branded whore?" Elias tried to rise, but a boot slammed into his ribs, sending a lightning bolt of pain through his side. He bit down hard, blood filling his mouth. "We know she's with you, Gray. Bexley's got a price on her head. High one." Another kick, this time to his shoulder. Elias laughed, sharp in horsaro. "That why you came 3-on-1? For a girl half your weight?" The biggest one grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against a tree trunk. "We came to give you a choice. Tell us where she is, or we leave you for the buzzards." Elias looked him square in the eye, pain slicing through every breath. "You kill me," he rasped, "and you'll never find her." The man punched him and something cracked in Elias's side. He groaned, sharp, guttural. The second man raised a length of wood and brought it down across his ribs again. The world tilted, but he never spoke. When they finally left him, broken, bleeding, breath wheezing through cracked ribs, they took his boots and left him barefoot in the dirt, hoping the cold would finish what their fists began. He lay there curled around the pain, coughing blood, eyes barely open. The stars swam above him. And then, "Bell!" Her voice cut through the trees, desperate, afraid. "Bellinus!" Maeve crashed through the brush, breath ragged, face pale with panic. She dropped to her knees beside him. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She touched his face, his chest, his shirt soaked with blood. "You're hurt. Oh, God. I'm fine." He croaked, barely audible. "Just a bit bruised." "Liar," she snapped, trying to lift him. "What happened, Exley's men? They wanted you." She pressed a trembling hand to his side, felt the heat swelling beneath the skin. Her face crumpled. "Your ribs." He coughed, tried to laugh. "Only a few. Nothing vital." "Why didn't you run?" He looked at her through half-lidded eyes, and even through the pain, he managed to smile. "Because if they touched you," he said slowly, "I wouldn't be able to live with myself." She shook her head, tears falling freely now. "Stupid," she whispered. "So damn stupid." "I know." She slipped his arm over her shoulder and began dragging him toward the cabin. Every step was a struggle. Elias grit his teeth, tried not to groan. Blood stained the ground behind them. "You shouldn't see me like this," he said once, halfway there. "Too late," she answered. By the time they reached the cabin, she was soaked in sweat and shaking. She lowered him onto the bedroll, hands never leaving his body. She peeled back his shirt and hissed at the bruises, dark and spreading like ink under parchment. "Stay still," she said. "Do not move." He nodded faintly, breath shallow. As she pressed a cool cloth to his side, he whispered to Long as you're safe. It was worth it. She froze. Their eyes met. He was half broken, bloodied, gasping for breath. But not once had he thought of himself. She sat beside him through the night, holding his hand in silence. And for the first time since she'd met him, Maeve began to believe that not all men took. Some stayed, some bled, and some loved without needing to say the word. The forest was still that morning, too still. Even the birds seemed to have held their breath. Maeve had risen early to fetch water from the creek, Elias still sleeping under the weight of healing ribs. She was halfway back when she saw it, the front door swinging open, the bedroll inside empty. No sign of struggle, no sound, just gone. Her heart dropped. The world tilted. Then something caught her eye. Boot prints fresh pressed deep into the mud from the previous night's rain. At least 3 sets heading west into the trees. She dropped the water pail, sprinted inside and grabbed the rifle leaning beside the hearth. Elias's revolver sat untouched on the table, half cleaned, forgotten from the night before. She grabbed it too, checked the chamber. Poor bullets, poor chances. She followed the trail into the trees, bare branches scraping her arms, breath sharp and fast. The prints grew fresher, disturbed drag marks. Her pace quickened. An hour passed, then two. Finally she heard it. A voice low mocking carried through the clearing ahead. Jonah Bexley. She crouched behind a tree, peering through the brush. Elias was on his knees, hands bound behind him, blood trickling from his temple. Bexley paced in front of him, shotgun slung low. Two other men stood nearby, armed. You think hiding her makes you a hero, Bexley spat. She's a mark, nothing more. You really think she won't run the moment she sees you limping and broken like the rest of us? Elias said nothing, chin lifted despite the bruises. Bexley sneered. Hell, I should thank you, saving me the trouble of dragging her back. Maybe I'll let you watch before I cut your throat. Maeve stepped into the clearing. Take one more step toward him, she said, voice clear, and I will kill you. The men spun around. There she stood, hair wild, dress torn at the sleeves, mud on her boots, but eyes steady, gun raised, a breath from firing. Bexley's grin faltered, then returned crueler than before. Well now, he drawled, ain't this something? The branded "we" shows her teeth. He stepped forward. She didn't flinch. You going to shoot me, sweetheart? After all we've been through? His voice dropped to a snarl. You remember it, don't you? The cell, the ropes, the way you cried when the crack of the pistol shattered the morning, one shot straight into his chest. Bexley staggered, blood blooming across his vest. He looked down in disbelief, then fell backward into the dirt. The other men froze. One turned to run, the other dropped his weapon and backed away with trembling hands. Maeve kept the gun raised until she was sure they were gone. Then she dropped it. Her knees gave out and she collapsed beside Elias, hands shaking violently. I killed him, she whispered, staring at the blood. I killed someone. Elias leaned toward her, even with pain in every breath. You saved my life. She shook her head, eyes wild. But what does that make me? What does it mean if I could do it? If I could pull the trigger like that? He reached for her, bound hands brushing her cheek. It means you are stronger than what he did to you. She stared at him, eyes filling. You're not afraid of me now? He held her gaze. I have never been less afraid. A sob escaped her lips. I thought if you saw me like that, you'd see what he saw. Elias leaned close, whispering through pain. I don't see what he saw. I see the woman who came for me. The woman who walked through hell and stood up to the devil. She lowered her head, pressing it to his shoulder, shaking with relief. I thought I had lost you. You found me. It was only then she reached behind him, cut the ropes, and pulled him into her arms. They stayed like that for a long time, surrounded by silence and fallen leaves. Maeve had pulled the trigger, but for the first time, it wasn't in fear. It was in love and survival. And she wasn't sorry. The forge behind the cabin was nothing more than a blackened stone pit and an old anvil. Elias had hauled up the ridge with a busted wagon wheel and sheer stubborn will. There was no shelter from the wind, no roof above, just open sky and the steady hiss of hot metal meeting cold air. But it was enough. He stood there at dawn, sleeves rolled, shirt soaked with sweat despite the morning chill, hammer gripped in calloused hands. Every strike echoed through the clearing like a slow heartbeat, the sound bouncing off the trees, waking birds and stirring something deeper. Maeve stood in the doorway of the cabin, wrapped in one of Elias's old coats, arms folded tightly across her chest. She didn't ask what he was making, not with words, but her eyes stayed fixed on him, watching, listening, waiting. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he moved like a man shaping more than just metal, like he was trying to shape meaning from ruin, trying to craft something that could last. The bullet casing had been in his satchel since the last day of the war. One of the final rounds he'd chambered in the chaos of fire and smoke. He had never fired it. Something had stopped him. Maybe fate, maybe grace. He didn't know why he kept it. Maybe it reminded him of what he'd survived. Or maybe it had always been waiting for this. He placed it gently in the fire until it glowed red hot, then pulled it out with iron tongs, laying it across the anvil. The first strike flattened it with a metallic cry. The next shaped it. Then again, and again, he moved slowly, methodically, turning the shell from a weapon into a ring, rough-edged, golden from the brass and warm from the fire. When it cooled, he filed it smooth, polished it with a piece of cloth and ash. No engraving, no stone, just the memory of heat and the promise of what came after. By the time he finished, the sun had risen high over the pines. The air smelled of wildflowers and morning earth. Ilias wiped his brow, pocketed the ring, and turned to face the open field. "Maeve," he called softly. She stepped out, coat still wrapped around her shoulders, hair loose and tangled in the wind. He was standing near the edge of the trees where the field gave way to tall grass and bursts of color. Blue bonnets, Indian paintbrush, wild mustard stretching for miles. Spring had finally come to Texas. She walked to him, bare feet brushing through dew-kissed blades. He didn't wait. He met her gaze, steady and sure, no fear in his voice. "I was never supposed to make it out of that war," Elias said, "and after it ended, I didn't think there was anything left for me. I was walking through the world like a ghost." Maeve's throat tightened. "But I found you," he said. "Or maybe you found me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. It glinted faintly in the sunlight, modest, unpolished, forged by hand and memory. "This was a bullet once," he said, voice thick. "Now it's a promise." He dropped to one knee. "Maeve Carter, I know what they did to you. I know what they tried to take, but they didn't take your fire or your grace or your soul." He looked up, eyes shining. "You gave me a reason to live again, to fight for something real. Will you marry me? Will you build something with me that the war couldn't destroy?" Maeve stood motionless. Her fingers trembled. She looked down at her hands as still scarred, down at her leg where the brand still lingered. Then she looked at Elias. He wasn't looking at her scars. He was looking at her, the woman who had chosen to survive, to stay, to love. Tears filled her eyes. She smiled. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Elias slid the ring onto her finger. It was imperfect, forged from ruin, but it fit, as if it had always been meant to. She cupped his face in her hands, and when she kissed him, it wasn't just love. It was survival. It was salvation. And in that field of wildflowers, under the wide Texas sky, they both knew they had taken what was meant to destroy them and turned it into something sacred. The sunset bathed the hills of Texas in golden rose, casting long shadows across the small wooden chapel on the ridge. The heat of the day had softened into a gentle warmth, the kind that touched your skin like a memory. The air smelled of honeysuckle and dust, the wind whispering through the grass like it too had come to witness something sacred. Inside the chapel, the pews were filled with townsfolk, quiet, curious, uncertain. Word of the wedding had spread like wildfire. They knew her name now. They knew the mark she bore. They whispered of the scar, of the soldier who had taken her in, of the nights she had been seen buying bread alone, head bowed, of the mornings she had walked out of the doctor's office holding Ilias's hand. Some came to judge, others came out of guilt, for all the times they had looked away, but most came for the story, the girl branded and the man who never let her go. Candles flickered in the corners. Miss Alberta, the seamstress, sat in the front row, clutching a small handkerchief she'd sewn herself, and then the doors creaked open. Maeve stepped through. She wore a simple white dress, hand-stitched by Elias with clumsy fingers, every seam tugged and redone until it fit. Miss Alberta had helped him with the sleeves, adding a soft lace borrowed from an old christening gown. The hem wasn't perfect, a stitch here, a loose thread there, but it was beautiful in the way only something earned could be. Her hair was pinned back with wild flowers, blue bonnets, Queen Anne's lace, and a sprig of lavender behind her ear. Her eyes, once darting and guarded, now held stillness, not the stillness of fear, the stillness of someone who had made peace with being seen. Her walk was steady, back straight, shoulders proud. The scar on her thigh showed beneath the slit of the dress. She let it. She did not hide it, and no one in that chapel looked away. A little girl scattered petals at her feet, laughing with delight. She didn't know the weight of what she was honoring, but somehow she carried it all the same. The room held its breath. Then someone clapped. A single pair of hands, then another, and another, until the room swelled with applause. Not for beauty, for bravery. Elias stood at the altar, clean-shaven for the first time in months. His shirt was freshly pressed, his boots polished. His ribs still ached with every breath, but he stood tall. He had never looked more like a soldier and less like a man at war. His eyes never left her. When Maeve reached him, she smiled. "You did this," she whispered, barely audible. "So did you," he answered, just as quiet. The preacher began the ceremony, voice steady, but for most his words blurred beneath the hush of hearts being rearranged. When it came time for vows, Elias took Maeve's hands in his and turned to face the crowd. "I want you all to see her," he said. "Not the mark, not the pain, not the past." He looked back at Maeve, his voice steady. "Sure, she is not the girl they tried to break. She is not the thing they tried to brand. She is the woman who survived, and she is not someone's property. She is someone's hope." Then gently he slipped the brass ring onto her finger. It was imperfect, shaped from an old bullet casing, but it was hers, forged from fire, from choice, from love. Maeve blinked back tears. Her lips parted, but words failed her. There was no need for words, only breath, only love. When the preacher gave them permission, Elias kissed her slowly, carefully, reverently, and the chapel erupted. Cheers, applause, quiet tears, whispers filled the air. Maybe Grace still lived in Texas. They walked out hand in hand into the light of the setting sun, her dress catching the breeze, the scar visible like a flag never lowered. Outlaws may have once ridden these hills, but that day it was a different kind of legend being written. Later that night, beneath a sky full of stars, as the fire cracked low and the embers glowed like tiny suns, Maeve sat beside Elias. Emmy lay curled against her leg, already asleep, her little chest rising and falling like a lullaby. Emmy looked past her. Maeve stared into the flames. "I was branded as something broken," she said quietly, "something used." She looked at the ring on her finger, then at the scar that still lived with her. But he looked at me like I was something rare. Her fingers brushed Elias's hand, and for the first time in my life I believed it. If Maeve's story touched you, if you believe love can rise from scars and second chances, then you're right where you belong. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more powerful frontier romances where healing runs deeper than blood and love always finds a way. Hit the bell, stay with us, and remember, you're not your past. You're who you choose to become.